The sauce was hot, but not as scorching as the lie it masked. Welcome to Wolfe Mysteries. I'm your host. This mystery-loving crew keeps growing. Drop a comment with where you're tuning in from. I love seeing where you're all at. When I opened the brownstone's front door that Tuesday morning, I didn't expect a woman in chef's whites, gripping a mason jar in one hand and a paper bag in the other, like it held classified intel. Tall, angular, she had the look of someone who could julienne an onion with a stare. "Mr. Wolfe," she said before I could roll out the welcome mat. "I need Mr. Wolfe." "You and half of New York," I replied, giving her the standard once-over polite but thorough. "He's deep in the sacred art of ignoring doorbells. I'm Archie Goodwin. If you want a shot at the big man, you go through me." She thrust the bag at me, uninvited. "This is Sugo Diavola. It'll speak louder than I can. I'm no stranger to food as a bargaining chip. Wolfe's stomach has brokered more deals than a diplomat, but I don't take sauces from strangers, especially at 9:17 a.m., reeking of desperation instead of confidence. "What's the play?" I asked. She looked past me, like she could see Wolfe brooding in his chair. "He knows me. He's eaten at my restaurant. I need his help, and he won't say no once he tastes this." "Lady," I said, "you'd be shocked at what Nero Wolfe can refuse, especially when it shows up early, uninvited, and aromatic." Still, the scent wafting from the bag was no lightweight rich tomato, laced with a sly heat that teased the nostrils. Even Wolfe's principles might bend for a sauce with that kind of pull. "Name?" I asked Gia Lombardi. She said chef owner of Lombardi's Flame, now that hit the Rolodex. Wolfe had mentioned the place once in one of his rare foray in documentary. During a particularly uninspired lunch, they overchar the garlic, but their caponata shouse restraint acceptable, which in Wolfe speak was basically a love letter. I stepped aside, come in and play the long odds. 10 minutes later, I was upstairs in Theplet. Rooms while Fritz put the source through preliminary testing. Heating and sniffing it like it might explode. I figured if anyone could neutralize a culinary bone, it was Fritz. When I got back down, Gia Lombardi was seated straight back, knees together, like she was awaiting sentencing. Wolfe was as always in the chair that bore the full weight of his genius and girth. "I have tasted your sauce," Wolfe said. Eyes closed at his overconfident yet persuasive proceed. She blinked. "I thank you. It's part of the issue," explained Wolfe, opened his eyes, which Wash's version of. Leaning forward, she glanced at me, unsure if I was furniture participant. Wolfe made a flick of the wrist that meant she could continue without censoring herself for my benefit. "Me business partner, Charlie Arno, is missing," she said, "and the last person who saw him was me during dinner prep on Friday night at the restaurant. I Madihin that sauce. He never left, but the police think he left the building at 10 p.m. and disappeared." Wolfe grunted. "And you are concerned for his safety?" "I'm concerned about the rumors," she said. "My investors are circling like buzzards. They think I did something that he ran because I confronted him." "And did you?" Wolfe asked her. Jaw tightened. "Yes, I did. I told him. I found out he'd been altering invoices and shorting the wine inventory, but I didn't threaten him." Wolfe closed his eyes again. "And what was your source doing during all this? I'm telling you," she said, suddenly heated. "He ate it at 7:42. That was the time on the kitchen clock. Hugh burned his tongue on it and cursed me out. I remember a source that burned his tongue," Wolfe murmured. "Yet somehow burned your alibi. You get it?" she asked. "No," Wolfe said, "but I am interested." He paused, then gave me a glance that had instructions stapled to it. I nodded. "I'll start with the staff roster and the security footage. If there's any begging with the source," he said, "Fritz will assist you learn how it's made, and who has access to it." That wasn't the kind of assignment I got off in culinary forensics, but Wolfe wasn't talking about flavor. He was talking about manipulation, time, and truth. As I headed for the kitchen, Gia Lombardi stayed put, her back stiff and her eyes somewhere far away. Wolfe remained motionless, his attention now on a small orchid near his chair. Something about the woman bugged him. I could tell he didn't. Like cases that started in his kitchen, he liked them even less when they showed up smelling like secrets. But he was in weather, he'd admit it. Or not, you'd think that a professional kitchen erupting into scandal wouldn't manage to spill over into our little oasis of silence and obsessive routine. But you'd be wrong. Be 2:40. That afternoon, there were 2 aproned men and 1 soft-spoken woman cluttering the downstairs hall, shedding the aroma of cured meats, basil, and tension like a slow leak. Gia Lombardi had apparently taken Wolfe's interest as carte blanche to air out the whole walk-in she'd brought in half. Her inner circle Rocco Deo, her saucier with arms like cement pilings, and the vocabulary of a molting parrot tansy berk, the pastry. Chef who spoke to Wolfe like she thought he was auditioning for Top Chef Recoom, and a bookkeeper named Miles Lockett, who wore his anxiety like a necktie tight visible and possibly strangling. Him they weren't suspects, yet they were just a clutter of professionals dragged out of their habitat, glaring at each other, and pretending it was the lighting. Wolfe, of course, didn't come down. He never did for first rounds. He had me collect their statements, and by statements I mean interruptions, contradictions, and one impromptu debate about how long a sugar should simmer before it loses the point. You can't just add chili after 9. Rocco grumbled the heat doesn't steep properly. It's blunt. It was already steeped. Tansy snapped, not even looking up from her phone. The question is whether Charlie ever ate it or just told you. He did. He was good at that, pretending. Miles flinched like he'd heard something he wasn't supposed to heck on. Me watching him, and smiled the kind of smile you use to bluff out of a parking ticket. I gave them just enough room to knot themselves together. Then I took it all upstairs. Wolfe was predictably elbowed deep in displeasure when I briefed him. That woman, he said, eyes fixed on the orchid pot he'd taken to turning precisely 1 degree per day, has committed an indecency. You mean bringing 3 co-workers into the brownstone? I asked. Or bringing them before tea. She has corrupted my house with culinary ego, he said flatly, and worse, with imprecision. There is nothing I abhor more. Fritz, who had been silently oringing cheese puffs into geometric alignment, nodded solemnly. The source, Wolfe continued, is plausible as an alibi, if timing were irrefutable, but it is not the quarrel over ingredients. Like barbarians, no recipe, no rigor. I perched on the edge of the red chair, so the question is whether the source burns his tongue before he disappears, or after, or never. Wolfe said, let us not accept assertions. As fact, we have no confirmation that Mr. Arno consumed anything at all on Friday night. He's still missing. I pointed out, yes. Wolfe said, which means he has either been silenced, is complicit, or has absconded, and we have yet to distinguish motive from. Seasoning at 6:03 that evening, the brownstone got its second knock of Fede. A record Wolfe would have rather not broken this time. It was a detective, which usually means bad news or bad manners, but this one had. Both Detective Nathan Kramer was the kind of man who made coffee nervous, square-built, impatient, and blessed with the subtlety of a jackhammer. He didn't bother asking to come in. He just used a doorway like it towed him rent and stepped past me. Wolfe in? He asked, glancing around like Thewalls might lie to him. He's always in, I said, shutting the door behind him. The question is whether he's receptive. He will be, Kramer said. This one's on your turf. I raised a brow. Charlie, Arno said, turned up dead. That stopped me, not because death was new, it never was, but because Wolfe had been too calm all day, too dismissive. He treated the whole thing like a badly written menu where I asked freezer truck behind the Fulton Street Market stab wound, front left side, deep, maybe a chef's knife, maybe. Simbalici turned toward the office, but Wolfe's voice beat me to it. Mr. Kramer, if you insist on disturbing my evening, at least come in and be efficient. Wolfe had been listening. He always was. Kramer dropped into the red chair with all the grace of a brick into gravy. Wolfe made no attempt to mask his revulsion. he just tilted his head back a quarter and the ceiling was suddenly more appealing than the New York Police Department Charlie. Arno Kramer said was found this morning in a frozen produced truck behind Fulton Market, no wallet, no keys, no phone stabbed, cleanly in the chest, and left to chill. Overnight, Wolfe sniffed you imply, was murdered for vegetables. I imply nothing, Kramer. Said his state that you're involved indirectly the chef who dragged you and Gia Lombardishes on our radar. Last known person to see him alive, and I hear she showed. Up here yesterday with a jar of sauce and a sob story. Not a sob story, Wolfe said, a complaint of procedural sabotage and professional betrayal. Kramer gave me a look that said, "Is he always like this?" I gave him one back that said, "Worse?" Then he turned to me. "She really bring a source?" She did, I confirmed. Spicy convincing she claimed it proved Arno was alive at 7:42. Friday night and well enough to curse her cooking trouble. Here's no one. Agrees on whether he ate it or just sniffed it. Kramer leaned forward. If you've got anything solid, say so. Otherwise, stay out of the way. Wolfe closed his eyes. The impedance of law enforcement is exceeded only by its appetite for shortcuts, you calling. Me lazy Kramer barked no Wolfe. Said calmly, I'm calling you premature. You do not yet have suspects on the hypothesis. Well, let's fix that. He pulled out a small notepad. You've met them, haven't you, Gia's kitchen crew? I nodded. 3 off them, enough tension. To reheat a steak names. Rocco Di Feo Saucier and self-styled source evangelist Tansy. Berk pastry chef and truthshe minimalistmos. Lockett, the accountant who flinches like he's hiding a ledger under his conscience. Any one of them capable of it, Wolfe. Opened his eyes. Everyone is capable of murder. Mr. Kramer, the question is motive, means, and opportunity. You're here because you've identified the corpse. We are engaged in identifying the context. Kramer gave him a long, slow blink. Don't get cute, Wolfe. If she's involved, she's involved. Wolfe said, but involvement is not guilt. You planning to work this case? Wolfe glanced at the window where rain was beginning to fontaine. Mirrored bullets on the glass. I already am. Kramer stood. Don't conceal anything. Wolfe let that one hang in the air like a spoiled sow after the door shut behind him. Wolfe turned to me. Mr. Goodwin, begin by enumerating our dramatist persona. I opened my notebook. Gia Lombardi. I began chef business partner to the deceased alleged. Burner of tongues and pointer of knives. Claims to have confronted Anno Friday evening about cooking the books and bottling fake numbers noted. Wolfe said Rocco Di Feo Senior kitchen lieutenant. Acts like he bleeds marinara. Seems loyal to Gia Buzz. Protective of the kitchen hierarchy. Could have had turf issues with Charlie Wolfe. Nodded. Tansy pastry chef cold as a sorbet. And just as quiet, she implied Arno. Liked to make promises he didn't keep. And the 4th Miles Lockett I said keeps the books. Gia said he was hired by Arno Miles. Didn't like that Gia affronted his old boss. But he also seemed a little afraid, like maybe he knew more than he was saying. Did they all have access to the source? Yes, all 4 of them. The kitchen is open plan except for Gia's little herb cabinet, which he keeps locked. But everything else, the sugo, the knives, the freezers. Each of ground Wolfe steepled his fingers, and who last saw Mr. Arno alive apart from Gia, none of them claimed to according to their stories. Charlie walked out the back door just after 10 o'clock and never came back, but there's no camera out back, no way to confirm. It. Wolfe grimaced. Then they lie, or they presume I stood and moved to the desk, Fritz. And I made a copy of the socks recipe based on what Gia showed him. He says the version she brought here wasn't the restaurant standard. Wolfe's brows lifted a half-inch. Explain. She upped the chili content. I said a late addition. She claimed it was because Charlie liked it with more kick, but Fritz thinks it was added post-cooking to enhance memory. Maybe I said her to enhance a story if Charlie never ate the sauce. Then saying he burned his stone. His theater wall size closed again. That's our circle, I said, and it's tight. He murmured, we need a disruption. That evening I paid a visito Lombardi's Flame. The restaurant was closed, but the staff had been asked to meet me. Their Wolfe's request Gia met me at the side, entrance and nervous, but composed. The kitchen was spotless, silent except for the hem of apron fridge and the occasional clink of cooling metal. All of them are here, she said. In the dining room, the lights were dimmed, low like the place was mourning. Thanks, I said. I won't be long inside. Thikru sat around a central table like kids called to the principal's office. I didn't waste time, I'll be blunt, I said. Charlie Anno was found dead this morning. The police know so does. Wolfe, he wants clarity, and you're going to give it to me. Rocco, stiff and dead. How? Knife to Thetis left in a freezer truck. Sometime Friday night? No one moved, but the temperature dropped. I kept going. We need timelines, real ones. No vague memories. Noguses, what time did you leave Friday, Rocco? He cleared his throat. I left around 10:15. Gia had already gone upstairs to the office, I asked. He nodded. She wanted to calm down after the fight with Charlie. Tansy spoke next. I was out Fedor at 10 o'clock miles, and Rocco were still back of house. I didn't see Charlie after 7:30 miles. Looked. Cornered. I stayed until 10:40 cleaning receipts. I didn't see Charlie leave, but I heard the back door slam. I took that in, and you didn't check. I assumed it was him. He said headed. It came and went. When he pleased. Gia was upstairs. Rocco was closing. Pantry stock. I didn't think. No cameras, I asked. Just the front, Gia said. And none of us used it. Tansy piped up. Maybe he left, maybe he didn't. But if someone killed him, it had to be after we all left, unless someone stayed behind, I said, or left and came back. They didn't answer, but they didn't deny it. Either you all had access to the knives. I said to the source to the story Gia told. Wolfe Miles broke first. Y'all think she's lying? I think someone is, I said, and Wolfe will find out who I left him stewing in. Silence and shut the door behind me. Wolfe had his circle tight, simmering and just beginning to boil the next morning. Wolfe was knee-deep in abathi and eggs. When I gave him the overnight report, he had pretended indifference as I recounted the cruise. Reactions to then news of Charlie Arno's death, but his fork paused midder at Miles. Lockett's story about hearing the door slam. If Mr. Lockett did not see Mr. Arno leave. Wolfe said finally, he assumes an assumption Mr. Goodwin is the mother of misdirection or incompetence. I said, you think he stayed behind and helped dispose of the body? Wolfe gave a flat look. I think he speaks with the caution of a man whose tongue is being watched, and we must now watch it more closely. I had a full schedule ahead, shadowing, questioning, and digging into the lives beyond. The source Wolfe, of course, would remain in Time B in his office, a cerebral moron from which no physical effort escaped, but every thread of logic was pulled. I started with Rocco de Filived in a walk up above a butcher shop in Etoria, the kind of place that smelled like meat, basil, and rage. Depending on the hour, he answered the door in hat shirt. That could have been white once, but now had a suspicious stain near the collar that looked like it had seen battle. Look, he said, waving me in. I didn't kill Charlie. You think I got time for homicide? Between prepping bone marrow and dodging health inspectors, you think you've got time to lie. I said, stepping past him, but I also think you're not subtle enough to do it well. That got a snort. Charlie was a jackass, he said, tossing himself onto a bar stool. Thought being a partner meant he could treat us like a franchise kitchen. Talked about standardizing sauces. Said we could jar them, sell them, outsource, prep. I raised a brow. Outsource? You mean? Exactly. He said he didn't get it. Gia's food was hers. Every spoonful he wanted to scale it like we were running a Chipotle. Was he stealing? Rocco hesitated. Gia thought he was fudging costs, shaving inventory stuff. You don't notice until your oil bill triples. Think. She was right. He looked at him hard. I think Charlie liked secrets, and he had one. What kind? Rocco reached at behind the counter and pulled out a small envelope. Found this taped to the inside of a dry goods cabinet. Feminine after the fight Saturday. I took it. Inside was a receipt. Wine 6 crates off Nebbiolo delivered Thursday, but no sign of it on the shelf or the books. Gia didn't know about it. I asked Benope. She was in Milan. All last week at a caisse. Supplier submit came back Friday morning Arno. Signed for that wine himself, man, if I borrow this be. My guest, he said, just don't pin this on me. I cook. I don't conspire next up Tansyberg. She lived in a building that probably had a personality. Disordergentrife. On the outside, haunted on the inside, her apartment was neat, fragrant, filled with photographs of plated desserts, each one looking like it could file its own tax return. He already told you, she said, handing me a coffee. I didn't ask for. I didn't see him after 7:30. I was plating soulets and trying not to set fire to the custards then. How do you know he left? I don't, she said bluntly. I assumed Miles said Herod. The door, Gia said she argued with him and went upstairs. I had no reason to doubt it, but now I'm rethinking it. Admitted. Charlie was slippery. He'd tell Gia one thing, me another, and I never wanted to be caught in a lie. So he'd say nothing at all and let the rest for us fill in the blanks. Any idea what he was hiding? She thought a moment. I once caught him reading her old recipe journals, the one she keeps locked in the pantry safe. Said he was just curious, but he was trying to photograph a page which owned something called Inferno, variant number 3. Sounded like a source butyl, had notes like a chemical engineer's, lab book ratios, pH, levels, timing, not her usual scroll. Did you tell her? Not right away. When I finally did, she said she'd already confronted him about another page gone missing the month before. He denied it, of course, and she believed him. She wanted to, but I don't think she did. I saved Miles for last. He worked out of a Y-Work-style office in the Flatiron, complete with potted bamboo and community cold brew. His desk looked like Simeon had cleaned it in a panic. You're back, he said, fidgeting. Has Wolfe figured it out? Do you think he has something to figure out? Mila swallowed. Charlie was dangerous, not physically, but in the way he operated, always 3 steps ahead, always smiling. Was putting together a separate investor pitch without Gia. What kind of pitch? To sell a line of bottled sauces. Miles said using Gia's name, but Therasipes would be his versions, easier to mass produce. He'd already filed a provisional patent under a shell company. CAPS. Did Gia know? She found out Friday morning. She called me screaming. Said Charlie had betrayed her. She was going to fire him after dinner service. Did she? Don't know. He said she disappeared upstairs. Around 9:50, he was gone by 10 o'clock. When I checked the office later, his bag was still there. So was his phone. Miles nodded. I locked it in the safe for her. Figured she'd needed to prove what he was up to. It's still there. I haven't touched it. Mind if I take a look? He hesitated. If Wolfe signs off, I'll get his signature and an engraved thank you cardie. Said just have it ready back at the brownstone. Wolfe listened to my report with growing disgust. When I finished, he exhaled through his nose. A patent, he muttered, duplicitous. And yet pedestrian there is no greater insult to the culinary arts than commercial dilution, but it gives motive. I said Gia finds out Charlie gets stabbed, recipes get protected. Wolfe didn't respond. I laid the receipt on his desk. Charlie ordered wine without her knowledge. 6 crates, no sign of it now. Wolfe's gaze lingered on the paper. Then he lifted a brow. You suspect wine was never for the restaurant, or I said it never left. What better way to conceal a body than among 6 crates of expensive Italian Cabernet? He grunted, and the source recipe he tried to photograph. I added, it's not about flavor, it's about formula. Gia wasn't protecting a dish. She was protecting intellectual property. Indeed, Wolfe said, and someone tried to steal it. I looked at him. Y'all think Gia did it? Closed his eyes. No, she is vain, but not careless, and certainly clumsy enough to kill, and then bring the murder weapons. Inspiration into my house. He blinked. You think the source is the key? I think Wolfe said we must now see what is missing from the source she brought us, not what was added. I'll say this for Nero Wolfe. When he goes quiet, it's not because he's relaxed. It's because some small critical pebble has jammed the gears of his mind, and he won't rest until he's extracted it with surgical force. That morning, he stared at the wine receipt. like it was a Rosetta Stone written in Merlot, the source she brought us. He said without looking for it was not the sauce she served him. So you're sure? I asked Fritz's. Sure, and that suffices. The specimen we tasted had a post-boil infusion of red chili. It was clumsy. The original recipe, what Fritz refers to as Inferno Variant Number 3, was intended to blend capsaicin, gradually building complexity Ja would not have. Altered it so inelegantly, unless she meant to simulate a reaction, not preserve the dish, so she staged Thebern. I said to create an alibi. Wolfe made a face possibly, or someone else staged it for her. I didn't like that. It meant someone was planting source-like evidence in our world. It was a new flavor of nasty. I'll check the pantry, I said. See who had keys. Maybe someone else got into that spice cabinet and made a knockoff. No, Wolfe said, holding up a finger. Let them stew. You'll go back to the restaurant tonight alone. Observe something is amiss, something subtle, something rearranged. See, you think it's physical. I think, he said slowly, someone has tampered with the truth. And if they tampered with that, they've likely tampered with other things. Find out. Watso at 8:30 p. I walked into Lombardi's flame. Dinner service was winding down. Music was soft, the lights low, and the scent in the air was the usual triumvirate of garlic, basil, and tenchinja. Spotted me from the host stand and tried not to sigh back so soon. She asked it like a bad soul. I said, mind if I take a look at the kitchen? Wolfe wants a few notes on the logistics. She didn't like it, but she didn't block me. Either. Fine, she said. Don't touch anything I rarely touch. I said I observed the kitchen was cleaner. Then an autopsy table. Rocco was chopping parsley like it had insulted his mother. Tanny was wiping down ramekins with the care of a museum curator. Miles wasn't present. Interesting. I made a slow loop through the room. Stove, pep station, dish line, everything in place. It's nothing obvious. But when I passed Thespis' cabinet, I saw something strange. The lock was hanging open. Who opened this? I asked. Rocco glanced over. It's always locked after close. Well, it isn't, I said, crouching to look inside shelves of jars, neat rows, but one jar paprika was pushed back half an inch further than the others, just enough to look like it hadn't been used, which was odd, because paprika was central to Chizugo. I pulled the jar out. It was lighter than it should have. When I checked Thebatom, there was a slip of paper taped underneath. I peeled it free, a printable lot. 2417D sample. Only not for sale. What is this? I asked aloud. Rocco came over. He saw the label and went pale. Charlie had samples. He said sent to a lab for shelf life testing. I only saw the box once Thursday night. He was hiding it in the office. Then what's this doing in the spice cabinet? I don't know. It wasn't there last night. Someone planted it. I said, or retrieved it. He muttered. I returned. T.O. Wolfe at 10:45 p. And with the label and a copy of the pantry layout Gia had given me earlier. He was still at his desk, eyes half closed, digesting a meal and a theory simultaneously. Someone, I said, tampered with the cabinet, left a commercial sample. Label tucked under. The paprika lab batch, not for sale. Wolfe opened high size. So he said Mr. Ano had begun production, or at least formulation. I said, Rocco says he saw a box of samples last week. Then why leave the label Wolfist to tie it to someone else, or to retrieve it later and remove evidence? He considered that, and the cabinet was left unlocked, sloppy. I said, or rushed. Wolfe drummed his fingers. Not Gia. She is too exacting. If she were hiding samplage, to do so behind a false panel and write herself a coded index. This was clumsy, so someone else. He nodded. Once. And you said Miles was upset tonight. Not a hair in sight. I said I want his files. Wolfe said specifically any mention of cost-saving measures, unauthorized accounts, or laboratory expense. I'll need to bluff in, then do so. The next morning I met Miles outside his co-working space and told him Wolfe had information indicating Charlio had set up a separate corporate structure called Concepts. I said ring a bell. Went pale. It was nothing, he said, just a placeholder Charlie was just testing the waters with Gia's name and her recipes. I didn't know he filled anything. Miles stammered. He said if it worked, we'd all benefit, compromised a percentage. Said Gia wouldn't need to know, and you believed. Him looked down I wanted to. I let him sweat for a moment, then asked, did you help him? He filed the paperwork. He said, I didn't think it would go anywhere. Where's the sample box? Now I don't know. He said it was in the office safe Friday night, but when I checked Monday, it was gone like Arlo Dart. I left him shaking and called Wolfe from the curb. He caved, I said. Charlie was trying to launch a bottled line using Gia's name, and Recipes Miles helped him set up special company. He says the sample box is gone. It is not gone, Wolfe said. It is relocated. Find it at 3:30 that afternoon. Fritz called me from the kitchen. You must come down. He said, now, that's a sentence you don't ignore from Fritz Breeder. I entered the kitchen to find him holding the jar of Sugo Gia had left on Monday. He was wearing gloves. There's something odd. He said the acidity is off. How artificial. There's a stabilizing agent. Something you'd use in preservation. This is not fresh Sugo. This was processed lightly, but distinctly, so this wasn't her source. He shook his head. It is a mimic one made to look and taste like hers, but it was prepared tallest refrigerated shelf life Wolfe. I relayed this was silent for a long moment. So he said, finally, the source is the lie. In the sample jar I added was left for us to taste, not to prove her alibi, but to frame it indeed. Wolfe said it was planted in my house as a narrative, not evidence, and the real source gone, he said. Along with Charlie that evening, Wolfe sat in his office as the thunder began to roll in over Manhattan. Rain danced against the windows. The brownstone was quiet still until he spoke. Mr. Goodwin, he said, you will summon them all here to Unraveling. 7 o'clock. All four? All four, he confirmed. They've trespassed once now, let them enter properly. What's your play? Not mine, Wolfe said. I intend to watch them executed in full view. There's something about inviting suspects into the brownstone that always gives me a small twinge of unease. Maybe it's because I know how sacred Wolfe considers his personal space, and every outsider crossing the threshold feels like a scratch on the floorboards of his sanity. Or maybe it's just that people behave strangely when they realize they're part of a puzzle being solved by someone who never stands up at 6:50 p. Sharp, I stood by the front door in a suit I reserved for uncomfortable evenings and messier truths. The first to arrive was Miles Lockett, looking like a man who had just remembered an unpaid tax bill. Tansy Berk followed 5 minutes later, composed but frigid like a pastry that never fully thawed. Gia Lamardai arrived, last wearing a dark coat, a darker expression, and just a hint of Fetcheff's arrogance. She usually wore like a second skin. Rocco didn't show not until 7:12. Sorry, he said, stepping in and shaking the rain from his shoulders. Train stalled. Wolfe would note fellatness. He always did. I ushered them into the office. Wolfe was already in his scare, gazing at them over steepled fingers, like a judge at the end of a long, indulgent trial. Fritz had brought in a tray of drinks, sparkling water, tea, nothing strong. This wasn't a party. It was pressure. You will be seated, Wolfe said, gesturing without looking at anyone in particular. This is not a forum for indignation. It is a crucible, they said, exchanging weary glances. The couch groaned under Rocco's weight. Gia, Chasith chair nearest Wolfe. Unafraid. Tansy perched like a cat, waiting to see who moved first. Miles had already started to sweat. Wolfe wasted no time on Monday. Hebig and Miss Lombardi brought me a jar of sauce. She claimed it had been served to Mr. Arno at precisely 7:42 on Friday night. He burned his tongue on it. Ergush could not have killed him. Shortly thereafter, he paused, then opened his eyes fully. It was a lie. Gia's head snapped up. I did not say you lead. Wolfe interrupted. I said the source lied. Fritz, whose palate is unrivaled, has confirmed that the contents of the jar you brought were not made on Friday, nor were they made fresh. They were processed, likely stabilized. For refrigeration, theft flavor was mimicked. The intent was not culinary. It was theatrical. A stunned silence followed. Ben Tansy said, so someone made a fake batch. Yes. Wolfe said the question is who and why. He leaned back. Consider the facts, he said, mister. Anna was attempting to establish a separate business enterprise. He had obtained samples. He had filed preliminary park. He had planned to use Miss Lombardi's name and recipes for personnel profit on Friday. Miss Lombardi confronted him. He disappeared. By Sunday, he was found dead, stabbed, stored, and left to chill like unwanted produce that doesn't prove anything. Gia said, I didn't kill him. I wanted him out, that's it. No. Wolfe said, you didn't kill him. And that is the crux. I watched the reactions. Gia looked angry, but not afraid. Tansy had leaned forward slightly. For the first time, Miles was practically vibrating. Rocco was blank. Wolfe turned to me, Mr. Goodwin, the pantry. I nodded and stepped out of the room for exactly 20 seconds, returning with the spice jar and the sample label sealed in a clear envelope. This, I said, placing it on Wolfe's desk, was found behind the paprikane, the locked cabinet. At Lombardi's Flame, the label is from a commercial test batch of source, not for sale, a batch Mr. Anna was reportedly keeping in the office safe, which as of Monday was empty. Miles exhaled like a balloon with a slow leak. Mr. Lockett, Wolfe said, you handled Arno's finances. You assisted in filing his shell company. You had access to the safe. I didn't kill him, Miles blurted. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. I agree, you lacked the conviction, but you did move the samples. Yes, Miles admitted. I took the box Saturday morning. I didn't want Gia to see it. I panicked. I stuffed the labels under the spices, but that's all I thought. He just left. Tanny said, then who planted the sauce in Wolfe's house? Now Wolfe turned to her. You asked it as if you don't know, but you do because you were the only one who understood the significance of Inferno variant number 3, the only one who caught Arno photographing it, and the only one who could reproduce it imperfectly using stabilizers. Tansy blinked. You're reaccusing me. No, Wolfe said, I am identifying you. You tried to protect Miss Lombardi. You knew the confrontation had happened. You assumed Anno had fled. You were wrong, but by then you had already created the jar and delivered it on her with your blessing. She didn't know it was fake. I asked. No, Wolfe said she believed it was hers. She brought it to me in earnest. Only you, Ms. Berk, knew it had been tampered with because you tampered with it. Tanzani's lips pressed it into a line, but she didn't deny it. I thought it would help her, she said finally. Charlie was a parasite. I didn't think he was dead, just gone. And yet Wolfe said, you manipulated it. In a murder investigation, that is not noble, that is folly. The room grew very still. Rocco shifted. Wolfe fixed his gaze on him. You were late tonight train, Rocco said again, unconvincing. Wolfe replied, you are retrieving something or attempting to set back. You have proof, I have inference. Wolfe said, but I also have a hunch, Mr. Goodwin. I stepped to the small table near the wall and picked up a sealed envelope I'd prepared earlier. Inside was a photo I'd taken the night before of a handprint on the fine side of the pantry spice cabinet. A smear of something dark had been partially cleaned, but not erased. I dropped it on the desk in front of Wolfe. This was found last night, I said, behind the paprika. Fingerprint is pending, but cabinet wasn't opened by accident. Someone was looking for the missing samples. Wolfe said, Rocco, you were loyal to Gia, but loyalty becomes treason when it chooses silence over truth. Rocco exhaled sharply. I didn't stab him. No, Wolfe agreed. You helped hide him. Gaspson from Miles, one from Gia. You found him after the confrontation. Wolfe continued. Dead or dying, likely dead. You panicked. You didn't want Gia implicated, so you stored him in the wine shipment. He ordered 6 crates, one missing. The delivery truck was already scheduled. Topic up returns Saturday morning. Convenient. That's insane, Rocco said. But without force, you saw him try to gut the business. Wolfe said you knew he would ruin her, so you made him disappear. You removed the samples, and Tansy, unaware of the death, tried to protect Gia in her own way by crafting a fake alibi. No one spoke then. Gia stood. You idiot, she said to Rocco. You should have told me. Rocco looked up. I thought I was protecting you. You weren't. Wolfe said you were protecting your idea of her, and that is never enough. The police arrived at 8:13 p. Rocco didn't resist. He didn't confess either, but the look on his face when Kramer told him they'd already pulled the shipping manifests from the wine. Distributor said everything. Wolfe declined to walk them out. He never did. I closed the door on the night's drama and returned to the office. Wolfe was already leaning back, eyes shut. Dinner, I asked. A knotted lamb with rosemary and a small glass of Nebbio Poetic. I said, you want dessert? I've had it. He said, human vanity, the most enduring flavor of all. If you ever want to see Nero Wolfe in his element, not one with orchids or obscure Balkan cookbooks, but the one where he truly thrives, it's in the aftermath of a Messivirion. El Sphinx is solved that Friday morning the city was soaked. Thepapers had caught scent of the Fulton freezer murder, and the brownstone smelled of time-damp wool and something else strategy. A Wolfe hadn't said a word over breakfast, which meant his mind washing on something tougher than Fritz's via roulette. I gave him 15 minutes, then I poked. You've got the confession. I said more or less. Rocco stashed the body miles, moved the source samples. Tansy faked the Sugogares clean, or at least unbloody. So why are you still humming like a tea kettle? Wolfe opened one eye. Because I do not believe, he said slowly, that Charles Arno died, or Rocco claims he found him. That stopped me. He said the walk-in. I said back pantry cooler. Gia's confrontation ends. Charlie disappears. Rocco finds him slumped in the rack of fennel around 10:30. Yes, Wolfe replied, but that explanation, while convenient, is incorrect, because it would require Charles Arno to die offensivity. And Mr. Arno, as we have established, was many things. Duplicitus paracostus, ambitious, but never passive. So I said, sliding into the red care, you think someone else killed him? I think Wolfe replied that Rocco stumbled up in the aftermath. Yes, but the death was neither accidental nor secondary. It was intentional, premeditated, surgical. He tapped his fingertips together. We were shown a mess, Mr. Goodwin, and we believed it was spontaneous. But the true crime was elegant. The cover-up was the clumsy part. I gave him a minute. He doesn't always start at the top of the staircase. He begins halfway down and makes you chase him. You think someone lured Arno to the pantry. I asked. No, Wolfe said. I think he never made it there. I think he died in the office where these samples were stored, where the confrontation happened. Gia's office precisely. But she wasn't there? I said. No, Wolfe said. And that is the only thing that saves her. I spent the afternoon retracing the logistics, the layout of the restaurant, the schedules, the key card logs, what there were of them, and most importantly, the silence between the timelines. Gia had gone upstairs at 9:47 p. And Friday, according to Tansy Miles, said Arno left shortly after 10. No one saw him, no one heard him, but someone knew exactly how long the hallway cameras rolled before looping, and how often the security guard outside the neighboring storefront Tuca. Smoke break. I confirmed that with a little cash and a little charm back at Brownstone. I delivered my findings. The window was 8 minutes. I say between 9:50 and 9:58. No one was visible on the rear hallway or the back alley. No cameras, no eyes. Just time. Wolfe nodded. And what of Miles still claiming innocence? I said, still twitching. But I dug deeper. I placed a folder on the desk. This, I said, is the clincher. Inside were 2 pieces of paperone, was a shipment order for 6 crates of Nebbiolo. The other was a pending transfer request, dated 3 days before the murder, for a bulk supply of industrial-grade stabilizer sent from a corporate email address that didn't belong to Lombardi's Flame. It belonged to CA Concepts. The stabilizer, Wolfe said. For the source? Yep, I said, which means Charlie wasn't the only one setting up shop. Miles was on board. He was helping formulate. He ordered ingredients. He kept receipts. He had motive, means, and a full set of business plans that never got shared with Gia. Wolfe tilted his head, and Rocco still scared. I said, but loyal heckenfest to moving the body. But I don't think he knows who actually stabbed Charlie, he just assumed Gia did it, or that it was an accident. That assumption, Wolfe said, was orchestrated. That evening, Wolfe made 2 calls, one to Inspector Kramer, one to Saul Panzer. When Wolfe calls Saul, it means something's tightening. Saul showed up at 7:40 p. In his usual muted attire, and with a look that said he'd already been briefed telepathically. "I'll need the files," Wolfe told him, "and the wine." Truck manifest in full. Saul nodded once and disappeared into the evening, like a question mark walking on 2 legs. I turned to Wolfe, still not ready to name the killer. "No," he said, "I am ready, but I'm not willing yet, waiting for what? For the final ingredient." Wolfe said the one that makes the sauce burn the next day was quiet, too quiet. Wolfe read all morning, then dozed, then grunted at a particularly unstickous headline. At 3:16, the doorbell rang. It was Gia. She looked a different, sharper, not the grieving business partner or the friend victim. She looked like someone who'd finally decided to demand an answer. "I want talk no," she said, stepping into the office. "Without invitation, you said. I was innocent, I believe you. But I need talk know who did it, and why." Wolfe didn't stand. He didn't even blink. "Sit," he said. She did. He gestured to me. I handed her a printed photo, a still frame from a security camera 2 blocks down from the restaurant. The timestamp read 10:02 p. Murfride. The image showed Miles Lockett carrying a box. "I've seen this. Guide, you missed what was in it." Wolfe replied, "Mr. Lockett was transporting fee samples, but not just to conceal them. He was using them preparing his own line AFO rollout. Recipes, packaging, a test market. Schedule Anna was the fun and Lockett was the brain. And then Charlie cut him out." I said, intended to claim the company. "A lone patent and all." Wolfe nodded, "which is why Lockett killed him." Burr's eyes widened. "He lured Arno into the office." Wolfe continued on the pretext of discussing distribution. Likely offered a toast. One of the wine crates had been opened already, but the knife was already there in the drawer. The one Arno never locked, and Rocco found the body. Wolfe said, "Believed it was Gia's doing, chose to protect her, removed the body, hid the evidence." Lockett let him, I added, because it shifted suspicion and bought him time. Gia sat back, stunned. Wolfe, of course, looked unchanged, like he'd merely recited a passage from an encyclopedia, but she said slowly, "The source." Wolfe closed his eyes. "Ms. Berge said, tried to protect you, and in doing so nearly obscured the truth." I was quiet a long time. Finally she stood. "Thank you," she said. "No need." Wolfe replied, "I did not do it for you that night." Fritz served tomato risotto with a touch of sage. Wolfe ate in silence, though I caught the faintest flicker of contentment on his face as I sipped my coffee. I asked, "So why didn't you turn Lockett in last night?" Wolfe dabbed his lips because he had not yet confessed. "Well, he is cornered, and men like Mr. Lockett only feel safe in a maze until they realize it was built to trap them." By the time the guests began arriving for the second round of unwanted aspidity in the brownstone, the air in Wolfe's office was as thick as the bottom layer of a neglected castle. That Fritz had dusted and aired the room twice, and Wolfe had instructed me to adjust the lighting to a setting that neither flatters nor forgives that washes way of saying, "No one leaves here unpulled." At precisely 700 p.m. the first knock came. I opened the door to find Miles Lockett, looking like he just remembered every unpaid bill he'd ever signed off on. He walked in without a word, like a man resigned to the Bladetanzberg. Arrived second, clutching her handbag like it might offer moral support. She gave a tour nod and pestilently into the office. Gia came last, no coat, no hesitation. She gave me a look in the way and measured unspoken something between "thank you" and "don't pity me." Wolfe had requested all 3. Rocco was notably absent on account of being in city custody, and as Wolfe had put it, no longer of strategic value inside the office. Wolfe didn't greet them. He waited for the soft thud of the door closing behind me, and then, "You may be seated." They took their places. Wolfe didn't move from his chair. He never did, but his gaze made laps around the room like a butcher, eyeing a lineup of underperformings. I have asked you here, he began, not to revisit Mr. Anno's death, although we missed, but to discuss the deception that followed it, specifically the deception that reached this house miles ahead. Dropped. Gia glanced at him, then back at Wolfe. You already know. Who did it, she said. Why are we here? Because the truth is incomplete, Wolfe replied. There is confession, and then there is clarity. Head turned his eyes to Miles. You killed him, he said flatly, because he betrayed you after Yao had helped him set up the Shell Corporation, filed the samples, and arranged the packaging. You were his accountantes. But also his architect. Miles swallowed, but said nothing. You intended to launch with him, Wolfe continued, and when he cut you out, you saw it as more than betrayal. You saw it as robbery. Saw you arrange to speak with him. Friday night, privately in Gia's office, you killed him, not with passion, but with precision. I watched. Miles's hands, they twitched once, then stilled. You used the knife from the drawer under the desk. Wolfe said you cleaned it, locked the office, and waited. You knew Rocco would come. You counted on it. Miles looked up. His voice, when it came, was barely audible. How Wolfe gave the faintest shrug, because you are not clever enough to improvise. Your entire scheme was bureaucratic. You hid behind forms and samples, but your downfall was time. He gestured toward the small side table where I had placed the keypiece. Earlier that afternoon, Mr. Goodwin, I lifted a sealed plastic sleeve. Inside a crumbled, sticky note found in the restaurant trash, retrieved by Saul Panzirin. It in Charles Anno's handwriting. Need to speak. 9:30. Keep her out, Emma. Miles stared. Arno Wolfe. Syed had second thoughts. He was going to cut you out, yes, but not without confrontation. He summoned you to talk to end it. I didn't, Miles. Started. Wolfe held up a hand. No, he said, not now. Your attempt to implicate Ms. Lombardi failed. The false alibi was an accident. Ms. Berk acted without your knowledge, but you benefited from it and let it stand. He turned to Tansy. You should not have done it. She didn't speak, just looked down. Nor, Wolfe continued, shall Mr. Deo have concealed the body, but he did so because he believed Ja had done something rash, because he loved her in his way. And you? He turned back to Miles. Let him, because it solved your problem. Gia spoke up then all this time, said, you smiled at me, ate my food, signed my payroll, and you were stealing it all. Miles looked at her. I didn't want to nod at first, but Anno said you were going to push me out, that I wasn't core, that when you found out, you'd fire me anyway. You could have told me. She said. He laughed once bitter, and you would have forgiven it. Yes, she said, because I would have believed you were worth saving. Silence thick as rue. Wolfe cleared his throat. There will be consequences, Miss Lombardi, but not for me. I nodded and stepped forward. Detective Kramer is waiting outside. I said he'll want a full statement. Miles stood slowly like a man at the edge of a long, inevitable fall. I didn't mean for it to happen that way. He muttered. He wasn't supposed to. Wolfe cut him off with a slight wave. Intention Hesed is no excuse. You may go. I opened the door. Kramer stepped in, flanked by uniformed Miles. Didn't resist after the door closed behind them. The room. Wavery quiet. Wolfe looked tired, but in that odd way he always did after victory, a kind of intellectual fatigue, never physical. Gia stood. I'll rebuild, she said mostly to herself. Without them you may. Wolfe said, but be wary. Fire lives residue, even after the burn is gone. She didn't thank him. She didn't need to. Sheriff Tansy lingered a moment longer. I'm sorry, she said. Wolfe didn't reply. Sheriff too later, as Fritz laid out a tray of oxtail stew with polenta cakes. Wolfe shifted in his chair and looked at me. It was not a clever murder, he said. It was merely disguised by clever people, and people, I added, who thought. Food could cover anything. Food, he said, reveals more than it conceals. A man's appetite for a Goodwin is a reflection of his will. Arno had ambition, but Lockett had hunger. Onez forgivable, and the other must be sated or extinguished if you're ever lucky, or unlucky enough to sit in Nero Wolfe's office during what I call the verbal guillotine hour. You'll notice something peculiar. It's not the silence before it starts, Though that's part of it, it's no Tevan Wolfe's posture, which never changes no matter how many lives hang in the balance. No, the tell is in the stillness a dense, humming tension that builds with each syllable until someone in the room, usually the guiltiest, starts wishing for a fire alarm or a mild earthquake. This time that someone was Miles Lockett. Unfortunately for him, he'd already left in cuffs, but Wolfe hadn't summoned everyone else just for the satisfaction of one clean collar. Not his style. Had believed in full illumination. Like a stage play, every character had to face the spotlight. Schwa wasn't a surprise that the next day Wolfe requested the presence of everyone still walking free and involved in the affair, even those who had already played their part and been dismissed. Gia Lombardi came quieter this time. Tansy Berk followed her neutral expression, holding Ferru Rocco Di Fio, arrived under police supervision, and with his attorney, a man who looked like he charged by the Commissal Panza, was also in the room, seated just to the side, observing as requested. When everyone was assembled, Wolfe lifted his gaze. This, he said, is Stephanal account. What you choose to do with it is your affair. He paused, then looked at Rocco. You were mistaken in your loyalty. Rocco shifted in his seat. His wire stayed frozen, but I saw the faintest twitch in his left eyelid. Wolfe continued that Gia Lombardi had struck Charles Arno in a moment of rage. You found him slumped in the office bleeding, and you assumed that is your original sin, not murder, but presumption. Rocco opened his mouth. Wolfe held up a hand. You acted. Yes, you moved the body, hid it in the wine shipment. You did not tell anyone. You believed you were protecting someone. Gia glanced at him sharp, but not cruel. He looked away. But your error, Wolfe said, was convenient for someone else. Now he turned to Tansy. You attempted to manipulate the timeline out of what I suspect was genuine loyalty. You created a mimic of the sauce Gia had served. You altered its composition so it could plausibly be from the same evening, but preserved and spiced. After the fact, you gave it to her, hoping it would support her story. I didn't know he was dead, she said quietly. I believe you, Wolfe replied, but your interference complicated. Just as had you not meddled, I might have seen the pattern more quickly. Gia leaned forward. So what was the pattern? Wolfe's gaze moved to her ambition. Concealed as partnership. Mr. Eno was not simply a thief of recipes. He was an opportunist of the highest order. He wanted your name, your flavor, your brand without your oversight. He sought to commercialize it, package it, sell it like soda. She said nothing, but her jaw tightened. But he lacked the technical skill, the logistics, the financial grounding. That's where Miles Lockett came in. Miles was not just your accountant. He was the silent co-founder of a venture intended to exclude you entirely. A betrayal. Rapid in spreadsheets. Tansy gasped softly. Rocco muttered something under his breath. Mills helped develop the preservation formula, filed preliminary IP documents under CA Concepts, ordered stabilizing agents, using an unregistered email address, created multiple invoices to launder the costs through dummy wine shipments. Gia shook her head slowly. I trusted him. Trust Wolfe. Side is a dish best cooked with skepticism. I tried not to smirk. He went on when Charles Arno decided to go solo cutting. Miles out off profits, the patent, and the ownership. Miles acted. He arranged to speak with Arno privately in your office. He used a pretext of reviewing shipments. Hebrout the wine crate as a container for both samples and eventually for a corpse. Tansy flinched. Anno was stabbed in the office. Wolfe said, not in the kitchen, not in the hallway, in the room where the paperwork lived, where secrets could deal quietly. He turned to Rocco. You found him not immediately, likely half an hour later, maybe more. You saw the knife, the blood, the silence. You assumed guilt cheers, and you acted. Rocco gave a short nod. No denial. Time. You removed the body, hid it in the wine crates, let the truck go out with the return Saturday morning. You said nothing. You saw it as loyalty. It was abdication. Wolfe took a sip of his beer as if nothing more needed. Sang Kaja Broki the silence. What happens to him? Rocco. Wolfe asked. It depends on the DAC and ceiling. A body is a felony, but he did not kill. he misunderstood. His guilt is moral, not legal, though the law may disagree. Tanny she was misled, Wolfe said, and meddled, but the law will likely see. Her actions as obstructive, not criminal. She may lose her career. That is a different sort of sentence, Tansy Satefury, Still, and Miles. Gia asked, her voice had an edge now. Wolfe smiled thinly. He will plead. He has no leverage. And when the patent files, the financial transfer, wine manifest, and the note are all presented, he will have no choice. Jaw closed her eyes when she opened them. Again, they were dry. Thank you, she said softly. Wolfe grunted, which is the most you'll get from him without an invoice. As they left, tone by one, Saul gave Wolfe a long look, respect mostly, and something else, satisfaction. I waited until they were gone. Wolfe sat back, letting the evenings hail around him. The brownstone felt still again. You did it, I said. Pa, he replied. It did itself like a good reduction. All I did was turn up the flame. You want me to open a bottle? Hess shook his head. No wine, he said. Not tonight then. After a pause, sauce is best when made to be eaten, not to be sold. That was Arno's mistake. He saw flavor. Asperduck, but flavor, he murmured, is fidelity. I blinked. That's poetic. Don't be absurd, he said, but he didn't deny it. By Sunday morning the rain had cleared from Manhattan, leaving behind the usual wet sheen on the sidewalks and a general sense that something sordid had finally washed itself clean inside the brownstone. Atmosphere had returned to its rightful setting, composed, exact, and mildly irritated at the world. Wolfe had resumed his usual rhythms. Orchid duty from 9 to 11, silence from 11 to 12, and lunch at precisely 12:15. The newspapers had caught up with the case, of course, and the headlines had a field day. Murder by Marinara was my personal favorite, even if Velth muttered something about tabloid dilatory when I read it aloud. He hadn't spoken much since the final gathering. That's not unusual. Wolfe is never more wordless than when he has nothing left to prove, but I knew the wheels were still turning. They always are. I found him in the plant rooms midman morning, misting a row of puffy petalumencore, like he was attending to royalty. He didn't acknowledge me at first. You'll be happy to. No, I said, leaning against the doorframe that Kramer called lockets, giving a full Statement fashion chronology. Moted the whole 9 yards, of course, he is. Wolfe said without earning. He also wanted to thank you. That part hurt. Wolfe grunted. He is welcome to keep his gratitude. Rocco's lawyer is negotiating. I added they'll likely go for obstruction, maybe a tampering charge to murder. And Gia's restaurant reopens next week. Wolfe turned from his orchids, his brow slightly raised. Already she's changing the menu, renaming it too, to what I flipped through my notes, flame and fidelity. His brows lifted a millimeter. Appropriate, he said. Fun sentimental. That's branding. He looked at me. Branding, Faz fraud, pressed as identity. She should focus on the food. We headed downstairs, where Fritz had laid out a modest lunch, duck confit over lentils with a shaved fennel salad and poached pears in star. A nice syrup. Wolfe took one bite and gave a satisfied side hat. In his world, ranked somewhere between a parade and a standing ovation midway through the meal. Hepau's napkin poised. She should not have trusted him. He said. Which one? I asked. There were several untrustworthy men on this menu. Locketh said he wore loyalty like a cologne, noticeable, but manufactured. She trusted all of them. I said. Rocco, Tansy, even Arno once she trusted the wrong attributes. Wolfe said. Arno's ambition, Rocco's protection, Lockett's competence. Pink Tansy. He was quiet for a moment. Tansy, he said, acted from misguided affection, a floor. I can forgive. It is better than vanity or greed. I'll quote you next time. Someone says you're a cold fish. Don't be absurd. We ate in silence for a while. It wasn't uncomfortable. Wolfe isn't much for conversation when chewing, and frankly, I'm not either. When the duck's this good after lunch, we adjourned to the office. Wolfe took his chair. I took mine. The Sunday calm had settled over the room like a soft rug. I expected him to close his eyes and drift into one of his contemplative stupors, but instead, he spoke again. She brought me source. Chia. I asked, he nodded. Not evidence, not documentation, not tier source. Most clients bring grief, she brought craft. He said intention, even if misplaced. You almost liked her. I said he opened one eye and aimed it at me. She respected the sanctity. Of flavor. That is rare. Would you eat at her place again? Possibly. He said, provided the tables are far from the kitchen I prefer, not to dine with ghosts. I chuckled. She got what she wanted. I say Darno's out of the picture lock. It's exposed her name's clean. And yet, Wolfe murmured, she has lost more than she realizes. How so? She believed in a partnership, he said. And that belief was not simply betrayed, it was exploited. It changes the palate permanently. I leaned back. She'll recover, of course. Wolfe said, but Harrisipes will never taste the same, not to her. He closed. His eyes, the room drifted into quiet. I looked around the office at the rows of books, the heavy desk thepiled walls that had heard 100 confessions and twice. As many evasions, I thought of how many people had come through this door thinking they could outsmart Nero Wolfe, and how few left without shedding a lie. You ever think, I asked, what it would take for you to kill Samio Neno? Not even hypothetically. No, Wolfe said. I find hypothetical murder dull. Actual murder is more revealing. I paused. So what did this one reveal? He opened his eyes again. That ambition without ethics, he said, is as corrosive as acid, eats everything in reach of empty. Hands that stir it, even in the kitchen, especially in the kitchen, is stood and stretched, untaking. The afternoon off, I said, there's a girl in Brooklyn who thinks I'm fascinating. I'd hate to disillusion her. Wear something passable. Wolfe murmured, you represent the household. I'll have Fritz press my sockses. I headed out. Wolfe called after me, Mr. Goodwin. I turned. He tapped the armrest. Once flavor is fidelity. He said. I nodded. So's loyalty. Only when it's honest. He said, only then. By the following Wednesday, the world had moved on, as it always does when a crime gets its name, its villain, and a neat little column in Metro Section Miles Lockett was officially indicted for secondary murder plus a smattering of white-collar charges that would keep the lawyers fed for years. Rocco was arraigned for obstruction, and Tanziberg, though never charged, had quietly resigned her position and disappeared into the background of some small upstate bakery. Or so Saul Panzer reported. Gia Lombardi reopened. Lombardi's Flame under a new name, Flame and Fidelity, and with a menu that boasted tighter control, fewer partners. And no signature source, just food, honest food. It was by Wolfe's measure a moral success. But it wasn't over for him, you see. Wolfe doesn't just win cases, he reestablishes order, the kind of orderly he understands fully, and which rarely aligns with the judicial system's concept of closure. And when something lingers like a faint smell in a supposedly clean kitchen, he roots it out. So when I walked into the office Thursday afternoon and found him staring not at a suspect, but at a small sea ledger of sauce that Fritz had replicated based on Gia's original Inferno variant nuri, I knew he wasn't finished. You ever going to eat that? I asked, dropping a manila envelope on his desk. No. Wolfe said, then why is it still here? He gave the jar a glance, like it had personally insulted his ancestry. Because it is a symbol not of the crime, but of the temptation that led to it, the sore-seated pill. Arno no Wolfe said, but it made him believe he could live forever. I took a seat. I'd been thinking about something. I said, Gia. She really didn't know, but part of her had to suspect. She suspected betrayal, Wolfe said, but not murder. And she lacked the vanity to assume she was the motive. That's a rare quality, rare, he agreed, but no tunique. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Wolfe spoke again. Mr. Renault, he said, was a parasite with polish. He did not invent, he extracted from others. From their labor, their passion, their trust. His death was not a tragedy. It was a conclusion. I gave a low whistle. That's cold, even for you. It is accurate. He replied, insufficient. He leaned back. But there is a lesson. Oh, I asked about flavor. Wolfe said, true flavor cannot be bottled. It cannot be franchised. It cannot be faked, duplicated, or stabilized. It is born from fidelity, not to process but to purpose you planning to embroider that on a tea towel. He gave me a sharp look. No, but I may require Fritz to inscribe it above the stove I laugheth office. Had returned to its old rhythm. The phones were quiet. The air smelled of polish and rain. Fritz was clinking plates in the kitchen. Theorchids upstairs were no longer neglected. The world for now was back in its lane, and Wolfe once again had restored the only kind of justice that mattered to him, the intellectual kind. As for me, I had a dinner date in Soho, 2 shirts at the cleaners, and a fresh appreciation for the difference between a recipe and a recipe for disaster. Final line Wolfe didn't solve the case with fists or fury. He did it the way Hellways does, seated still, and sure proving once again that in a world full of noise, silence is the sharpest knife.